and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Cinema Crusaders. We are the part of Comic Crusaders that talks about all things cinema, both present and past. Today, we have a very special movie for you. Before I get into that, though, I want to tell you that this is going to be a retro review. So retro reviews are where we talk about movies that are at least 10 years old. It's a little bit different format. We also talk about current movies. Sometimes we talk about TV shows or we interview actors and actresses, but this is a retro review. We have retro reviews not only on live, on video. Make sure you go over to comiccrusaders.com and check out our written reviews as well. We have a lot of great stuff. I think the latest review was by Shadewing over there, another Cinema Crusader, who unfortunately is not going to be part of the show today. But I am very excited to have my two Cinema Crusaders hosts, who I will introduce in just a moment. But first, I will introduce the film. We're talking about the 1997 film coming out of England, set in Sheffield, England, called The Full Monty. And you're going to hear about what that movie's about in just a second. I will say that we're not going to Full Monty today. We were planning on it, but YouTube guidelines have informed us that we cannot do the Full Monty in stream. We'd be taken right off the air. So I'm sorry, but you guys will not get all this gloriousness on air today. With that said, I am going to introduce my co-host for today. First is none other than the beautiful and talented artist and amazing commentator. He's on Sloppy Spoilers podcast with me. I'm talking about none other than Jeff, Dr. Fate Bracey.
Just be assured, everybody out there, that I am not wearing pants at all. Just use your imagination. I'm afraid that's YouTube for you.
Yeah, he was ready for it, but like I said, YouTube said no. And then
I shaved and everything.
Yeah, the man who would have brought in all of the views with his glorious, luxurious hair. He's an incredibly talented filmmaker. He's a comic writer. I mean, this guy, we would have sold out everything if we had gone the Full Monty, but he's still an incredible commentator and a Cinema Crusaders co-host, Lance Lucero of Warehouse 9.
Hey, thank you very much. It took me a minute to put my clothes back on.
Yeah,
during that 15 seconds of I was the one left out of that conversation, but instead
I covered for you as long as I could.
All right, thanks. I appreciate it.
So we are covering the Full Monty. If you haven't seen this film, I will say that it is a slow burn movie. It's a comedy, but there are a lot of dramatic elements to it. The basic plot of the movie, before I kick it around and we're going to start having a discussion about what the movie's about, themes and stuff like that, is that the central characters are Gaz and Dave, and they're friends. And Gaz is divorced, he's out of work, and he has a child. And it turns out that his ex-wife is going to take his child from him, or the government is, because he hasn't paid back child support. And he has no way of doing this. The whole town of Sheffield is depressed. In fact, the movie starts up with Sheffield, city of the future, and how this future was so bright. Fast forward 20 years later, and Sheffield is blighted. And so they're trying to come up with a scheme to get some money so he can pay the back child support. So he keeps seeing his kid. And early in the movie, they see that Chippendales has come up to Sheffield to do a show in a gentleman's club, a strip club. And they come up with the brilliant idea, or the infamous idea, it's up to you to decide, to do their own version of this, but they have to differentiate themselves between Chippendales because these guys are just working blokes. They're just lads, they're not chiseled Chippendale dancers. So this time they decide to go the Full Monty. They're going all in, they're going bare nude for the crowd. And from then on, you're going to see relationships build. You're going to see a number of things. They tackle so many issues in this, and this is where I'm going to kick it out because we need to talk about those issues. But suffice it to say, by the end of the movie, and this is a spoiler alert, they go the Full Monty, and they end on the Full Monty, but they keep it clean. They don't show you full frontal, nudity. They keep it so that it's hilarious, it's comedic, but still, I'm not going to say tasteful, but, appropriate so that you don't have to, hide the women and children because the bits are floating about out there, So,
right.
So with that said, I'm going to kick it around the table, and I just want to hear what you guys' thoughts are on some of the themes, or the plot or anything like that. And I've got a couple of things that I wanted to throw in there as well. But let's kick it over to Jeff real quick.
It's interesting. When I first saw this movie, I went to see it.
Yeah,
I went to see it. The marketing, as is unfortunately typical, especially with a foreign film. Sometimes distribution doesn't know how to handle it over here, and this is one of those rare exceptions where you see a British film that actually comes over here and plays in theaters. And it was marketed as a very lightly comedic sort of film for anybody who grew up like watching Monty Python or Benny Hill or Alas Smith and Jones, anything like that. You sort of have this expectation. Then you go to see the movie, and you find out it is in fact a dramedy. It is a serious film that deals with some serious issues that men have when they have different situations in their life. Everything from relationships to financial situations, struggling with divorce and dealing with child rearing in that situation. Being
a divorced father.
Yeah, and so it's a film that didn't affect me as much when I originally saw it in the 90s, but now I have an even deeper appreciation having rewatched it now. And it was surprising because despite it being a slow burn and despite all the drama and the intensity of the emotion in there, the comedy is still there, and it still won me over. It was a very charming film and introduced me to a lot of British actors that I wasn't previously aware of.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. I agree with that there was a lot of men's issues in there. It's funny, like you, I watched it in the 90s, and I had one set of experiences, and I'll say, I think it's fair to say the United States was in a different place then than we are now. I say that in 2022, we understand Sheffield, England, as given in that movie, much better than I could understand it then, and I've had more life experience since then as well. So, what about you, Lance? What did you think about the film? What did you get out of the movie and the themes of the movie?
Well, initially, it's a light comedy. It's got the melodrama to it. It's well paced. It has great characters. Everything is resolved pretty nice in the end. It's a well formulated film. But even back in the 90s, I think what struck me, coming off films like Showgirls or Dancing in the Blue Iguana, or maybe even Striptease might have been 1999. I was thinking about how this movie flipped the stripper thing right on its head.
I have to laugh at Showgirls. I'm sorry. People, whenever
it's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
It's a guilty pleasure, But and in contrast, you can look at like a Showgirls versus a Full Monty and see those themes that have the double standards to it. Usually these stripper movies that have the females in them, which that's usually the theme, are sexualized, and you can see somewhat the tropes or the cliches of being down and out, needing the money, having to exploit yourself as such, maybe even with a different persona, usually dealing with the stereotypical club owners that are almost like pimps. You can see, all these movies have those themes to it. And then all of a sudden, it's flipped on its head with the Full Monty. And although it's, melodrama and there's light comedy in it, a lot of those tropes aren't there. And I'm wondering, it's also from a totally male perspective. Yes, there is down and out performers in the movie, a Robert Carlyle. Getting laid off from the steel mill, not having money, going to the employment office. But it's kind of funny how they cleverly flipped it on its head in the way of, these are still and somewhat family-oriented guys trying to make ends meet. They're not on drugs, or they're not hiding from pimps. They're not fighting with their other rival strippers. Sure, there's strife. But I thought even as long ago as it came out, how they really cleverly flipped it on its head. And in a sense, there's a double standard. Now it's like they were promoting the idea of the Full Monty and stripping, and it was embraced, by the community. It was something that they were going to use to sell tickets, to make it rain, get the dollar bills. And then yet, if you think of all the other female stripper movies, it's usually like degradation. It's usually selling yourself. It's usually like nothing glamorous whatsoever. So in a sense, it's very clever how they flipped the entire theme on its head, and in a sense kind of made it okay in the end, when really they're still just strippers. They're selling themselves. And would we look at it the same if it was females doing this?
It's interesting you say that, because I've known some strippers in my life. Keep it clean, everyone out there. I've known them personally. And outside of
them.
Yeah, okay. Outside of their job, they were at the PTA meeting, picking their kids up from school, going grocery shopping, etc. And stripping is what they did to make the ends meet. So I definitely hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and to me, that was the driving force that kind of kept me interested in how this film was going to play out. And we all know that British, they're really great at exploiting the male ass as a joke. You know what I mean? I mean, they're all about male nudity, and it makes us laugh. We know we're going to laugh at this.
Yeah.
This isn't beefcake. This isn't designed to be sexualized. And that's what makes it even more funny, because these guys are not even close to fitting that model.
What I will say, and this might go into the technical aspect or whatever, but I will say that if you are an American viewer who has never watched this film and you're going to watch it for the first time, and you're not familiar with British accents, put the subtitles on. Put the subtitles on, because there are moments where you will not understand a damn thing anybody's saying.
As a matter of fact, I believe when this movie came out, its subtitles played in the theater, because they have a very distinctive accent there in Sheffield, and it's very thick. And if you're not used to watching British TV on the regular, you might struggle with some of the dialogue.
Yeah. But I think, Lance, your point about the British humor is so well put. And it's not for everybody, but if you love British humor, this movie will leave you rolling at times. And it will leave you, but at the same time, like you said, the melodrama. I mean, and the things that it tackled for 1997, there was a gay relationship in there at one point between men. And the way that they tackled that, I mean, Gaz and Dave joke about it a little bit, but it wasn't an unacceptable joke. It was just, two guys ribbing each other over, the fact that these guys decided to be in a relationship together. It was refreshing. And you think about the time, it was doubly refreshing,
Right. For its time, I think that's one reason why, because at first I didn't know what to say about the film. I'm like, what would I say about this? And then it kind of hit me. It's like, you know what? They really were clever 24 years ago, whatever now, a long time ago to take all these cliches and tropes that we've seen over and over again with stripper movies and just flip it right on its head. But on the same token, it's not controversial. There's no stigma attached to it. Whereas imagine if they did the same thing female wise, would it have really caught on? Would it have really struck the same chord? I don't think it would have.
I agree with you. And I don't think it would have had the same audience, because it had, it was a male centric movie dealing with male issues. And this is not me bashing on the lads. I'm just trying to be honest here. Males and females watch this movie. I watch this movie with my wife. Versus, let's take a movie. This is the first one that comes to mind. It may not be a great parallel, but it comes to mind. A movie like Fried Green Tomatoes, which deals with women's issues and stuff. I've heard of it. I've never watched it. I'm not interested in watching it. And I say that, and maybe that makes me sound pretty ignorant, but I'm just keeping it real and honest with you.
Right. It's like anything. It's a British import, so it's already considered art house fare. So there's already that attached to it, no matter how much they try to market it. But then the catchphrases and the log lines of the Full Monty and what have you is amazing. I mean, the humor will hit you; it'll blindside you. Maybe because we're Americans. I love when the humor blindsides you, or even when you're scratching your head, going, "Yeah, that's funny, but what are they thinking?" You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? I mean, that's the fun aspect of a film like this. And that's why, it was fun to reminisce about it. It's fun to reminisce about it. But also the fact that beyond the subject matter, I think they handled it in an extremely clever way. And I haven't seen it done since. I mean, you can throw things like Magic Mike out there or something, but that's beefcake stuff. That does not even rate compared to a movie like this, which has the backing of a strong cast and great performances. And if it doesn't have that, it ain't gonna sell.
Let's just transition from that then into the characters. I mean, and eventually we'll transition from characters into the acting performances. But I want to talk about the characters that really struck you first. And I'm going to start. I'm going to say I love Gaz. I love the other character I really do love is was it Gerald Wilkinson or Gerard? Tom Wilkinson.
Tom Wilkinson. Yeah.
Yeah.
He played Gerald. Yeah.
But the one that really stuck with me was Mark Addy as Dave, or as we would know him, King Robert Baratheon. And why that struck with me, and the thing that always sticks out with me every time I watch this movie, and then I'll be honest with you, as you get older as a man, you put on some weight, you get a little tum and everything.
Dad bod.
Yeah, and that affects you. And I thought it's interesting that here is a movie, and I'm going back to Lance, flipping a trope on its head. You often see women uncomfortable with their bodies and how it affects their confidence and everything. But here is Dave, who spends the entire movie thinking his wife will never find him attractive, that because of his situation in life with his job and everything else, that he doesn't even have a right to try and make love to his wife. It's only to find out that that's not what his wife loves about him. And at one point in the movie, he goes, "Of course I couldn't strip. Who would want to look at this?" And his wife goes, "Me, Dave, me." I mean, this is in a comedy, but such a powerful moment. I'm just curious what you guys think about that.
It's interesting. And even along the same lines of how Robert Carlyle's son, gets pretty bent out of shape about what they're doing. He just wants to hang out and do normal things, not see any of this weird stuff. But it's one of those drag your kid along custody situations where this is what he has to do. This is not his living, but this is what he has to do to make a buck. And that could be traumatizing. But it's also funny at the same time. It's like, wow, that's clever. And when you can write that and have it performed just right, you're knocking it out of the ballpark.
Yeah. And then the last thing I'll say before I kick it over, I'm going to start with Lance and let you, point out stuff, but is look at Gerald. I think this is very typical of men. He was so ashamed of his situation and had so much, I'm going to say male pride about what was going on. He couldn't admit to his wife he lost his job and made the situation worse in the end. But that feels really believable. That feels like a real situation. Just incredible writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Which goes back also to female and male positions in society. That idea of breadwinning, that idea of putting the food on the table, and then of course being in a leadership position, in a prominent job, and then have it stripped away from you. Yeah. It's relatable, and I think in a sense that's what also may be the appeal to the movie. It is relatable. These aren't supermodels that are hitchhiking to Vegas to be dance stars that, have all the looks and savvy on their side. These are working stiffs trying to make a buck. Yeah. And trying to cash in on what they may think is marketable at that moment in time, despite their hangups. So it's a very interesting and clever screenplay.
Even Mr. Horse worried that the penis enlarger pump won't work. It's just
right.
I mean, that is male to the core. What do you think about those things, Jeff? Real quick before I go to Lance.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when I first saw Robert Carlyle in the film as Gaz, I didn't like the character. I was immediately identifying with what was going on with the kid. I didn't like that situation at all. He's carrying his kid on these capers. They're stealing. It's legitimate why he and his best friend are trying to steal stuff. But at the same time, you're bringing your kid along into this, and the kid is constantly. And by the way, the young boy who plays the kid, Nathan. remarkable. All the actors, from the oldest to the youngest, just really remarkable in this film. And I just really felt his pain, and I was just moved for him. And it was like, because we've all seen deadbeat dads of one form or another in our lives, whether it was yours, whether you knew somebody who had that sort of thing. And, this guy he's just got all these schemes, and the poor kid is like, I don't like to go to your place. It's cold because he can't afford to heat it. It's like he's feeding him Chinese food. It's like, I don't even like Chinese. It's like, hell, it's what we got. So just doing whatever. But he started to win me over because he genuinely wants to be in his son's life. And his son wants to be in his dad's life. And that's the heartwarming aspect, that these two really bond. And his son is the one who really pulls him through at the very end of the film. Because while his mom is struggling with the fact that, your dad's such a loser, the kid's going the kid gets into it because his dad is finally really focused since they lost their jobs. Because when the steel mill went down, all these guys lost their jobs, and then several of the other characters are from different parts of the area. We don't think they were all in the steel mill, but it was nice to have that turnaround, to go from a character I didn't like at all right away to a character that I was really rooting for by the end. There's this very affable best friend, Dave, who I'm a guy who's spent more than a decade of my own life being extremely overweight. So I understand all of his insecurities and hang-ups about that. And fortunately, I'm a little bit more of an extrovert than he is, so I kind of got over it. But all of these things, and you look at the older gentleman, and he's worried about his penis not being big enough for the full Monty. Yeah. And maybe I was thinking there's like an age issue there he's thinking about too. You had another interesting character was I forget the name of the red-haired gentleman. They called him a lumper.
That was. Go ahead. I'll find it. Steve.
Yeah, and he's dealing with the hardship of dealing with a terminally ill parent, and that weighs on him so much that when they first encounter him, he's going to commit suicide and just he's given up all of his responsibilities. And that's another big issue, is like this sort of giving up. Dave's giving up on his life and his relationship and jobs, and this guy's given up on everything. And they're balanced by the members like Gerald, who just keep doggedly trying to make it happen. And so the camaraderie between the men becomes their saving grace. I really enjoyed seeing that particular male bonding, especially given that some of these guys had general antipathy for each other to start with.
I also say, from a writing aspect, the character Lumper, he does try and commit suicide. He's saved by Dave, and then, not missing a beat, they throw a comedic element in there right at the end of that, and it works.
Yeah, they spend the next minute trying to tell him different ways to kill himself.
Well, here's a little spoiler, but what happens is that Dave saves him, pulls him out of the car where he was trying to suffocate himself, and then the guy who was trying to commit suicide, Lumper, he says something to the effect of,
he calls him a bastard for it's a common insult in Britain.
So Dave throws him back in the car and shuts the door. It's just friggin' classic. It's really funny. Lance, what about you? Where do you go on the characters? Think about the characters.
Well, once again, it's relatable, and I like how they didn't beat it over your head. It doesn't feel so. I hate to use the term wokish as today. It seems much more honest, and racially, class structurally, from what we could understand as Americans going on in Britain. You know what I mean? It's I think it was spot on. And, Robert Carlyle, once you get Bigby out of your mind from Train Spotting, and you see, what he is here, a father trying to keep his kid, you begin to think, wow, that's a great performer. That's a great actor, who can go from an absolute psychopath to a loving father and be the catalyst for this whole cockamamie scheme. You know what I mean? The kind of the last person you would actually want to follow or listen to, but he sees it through. So he's that driving force. He's that catalyst in the movie that just binds everybody together, and everybody clicks. And that's when you got a good cast and good writing, when things just click, and it's fun to watch.
I think
the guys had great chemistry.
Absolutely.
I think Gaz is really he shows the arc that men can take. I think at the beginning of the movie, he's given up and accepted his lot in life, and has fallen very far, and he's lost his wife or his ex-wife and his son's respect. And then when he gets his passion back because he wants to keep his son, and so gets his passion to do something to keep his son, he wins his son back, to the point where at the end of the movie, his son puts his hat on him and tells him to get his ass out on the stage and perform.
Right.
It's just a really incredible story. So let's transition from the characters themselves to the actors who played the characters. I'm going to start with Lance. One or two actor performances that really stood out for you, and what, and why?
Well, I mean, I think, Robert Carlyle, he was hot in the 90s, man. He was coming off of Train Spotting. He
was a James Bond as well, which we'll kind of leave that one aside. But I think
he was in a forgettable James Bond in '99, and also Ravenous with Guy Pearce. That was bizarre. That was a bizarre flick. Yeah, I mean, the dude was just on fire, and he's interesting.
Even his short bit in The Beach was impactful.
Right, and then his Hitler portrayal a few years after that. I mean, the guy was a star. I mean, you can see, even though he was like a supporting character in Train Spotting, he stole the show, if you ask me. It's like, okay, this guy might be big, and then next thing you know, boom, he's headlining. And I think he's complemented well, with Tom Wilkinson, who, in his own right, turned out to be a big heavy. I mean, being in commercial movies like Batman Returns. These guys are good, and they're solid, and these guys are the guys you want to rely on, and they knock it out of the ballpark.
Tom Wilkinson's Chicago accent in Batman Returns is very good, by the way. That surprised the hell out of me when I saw that. And him playing Falcone, didn't think it would be good, but it was. So.
It worked, and that's once again, we got a British import and something American. That's playing hardcore American, and he nails it. Mm-hmm. So when you have guys like this that are that good, it's a blessing, especially to help promote your art, to help get your art and your story where it needs to go. So those two there, boom, they're the tops. They're the driving force of this film. And of course, everybody does an amazing job. Like Bracey said, everybody does an amazing job. It's just one of those rare moments where everything fits together just perfectly. But the stars, definitely Robert Carlyle, Tom Wilkinson, they make it happen.
Absolutely. How about you, Jeff? Any performance that really stands out for you, or a couple performances that you'd want to talk about?
Well, let's see. I got to say, I really enjoyed the kid, Nathan, William Snape. I just felt his suffering from the get-go. The disappointment. I had, unfortunately, I had some issues with my dad growing up. And so I've been that kid. I've been there. I've seen those sort of things. And so I could really relate to that. And so I guess I've got a little bit of a bias. So he was a real standout for me. And like any kid who's got some sort of distance from your parent, there is this longing to still have that proper relationship, because they are your parent and you are their child. And that's the natural way of things. So I couldn't help but root for him all the more, and which in turn made me root for Robert Carlyle. This was the film that introduced me to Carlyle, and he is just a magnificent performer. He is up and down the emotional scales in this film, and nothing about anything his character does feels off. Everything feels completely justified as far as what he's going through, whether it's his stubbornness, or his plight, or his anguish, to even his bizarre enthusiasm for doing all the wrong things. But I just was completely sold on it. Dave Addy, who later on we got to know as Robert Baratheon, as you said, he's also that he's that character we know. He's the introvert of the pair. He's the quiet guy. He lets his very exuberant friend kind of draw him out into all these things, and so again, he plays a very understated but significant role in the film. And while the other characters are all good in their way, I think once again, was it Tom Wilkinson who plays
Tom
Gerald?
Wilkins.
Yeah.
Yeah. He is so top notch. He's really, as far as the adults go, he's the third part of this triangle, the third pillar that's holding up this house, and this was the antagonistic relationship because he used to be the foreman of half the cast in the movie. And so they had, the us versus them, like we're the grunts on the ground floor, and this is the guy telling us what to do all day. And that's brought up very early on in the film. It's like, oh, Gerald, you're just like us. You can't tell us what to do anymore. But one of my favorite moments in the film is Gaz insists that they practice stripping in front of each other to get comfortable with the idea. And they all take off their clothes at Gerald's home, which is a very posh place compared to where most of them live. It's so uncomfortable for him, but he just does it. And then all of a sudden, repo men come to his house to start taking stuff. And the guys come rushing out, all in their undies, and stop the repo men from taking his stuff. And it's bizarre, absurd, and incredibly heartwarming moment that this should have been. I was expecting him to be terribly embarrassed by all this, but he just turns around and smiles in this beaming gratitude. He's like, thanks, lads. Thanks.
Yeah.
It was like, it was a great moment. Loved it.
Total British. That was very British.
It is one of the weird things that you see, mates interacting together in a British way versus American friends, dudes that are friends. It's a different dynamic a lot of the time. Definitely a different dynamic. I
think that solidified the moment when they saved Lumper. Like they're trying to tell us like, oh, you could have one of your mates run you over if that's how you want to go. I was like, I don't have any mates. They're like, they smack him. Of course you do. We just saved your life. We're your mates. I'm like, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a different sort of camaraderie over there.
Yeah. Right. Talking about actors, you brought up the kid, Nathan, who was played by Wim Snape. Now, I want to get your guys' take on this real quick. To me, child actors are always hit or miss. They're either good or they're very cringy. And I could never understand child actors that transition into adult actors. Who makes it, who doesn't. And so while you were talking, I looked up Wim Snape in his career, and it looks like he's 37 now. He's done bit parts on various TV series, and that's been about it. So here he was in this movie. I don't know how, successful this movie was over in Britain. I think it was fairly successful over here. And yet his career never took off. What do you guys think about child actors and as a general rule and who makes it and who doesn't? Either one of you can start. I guess since I'm the moderator, I'll start with Jeff and I'll go to you, Lance, if that's cool. So.
That's fine.
Yeah, it really depends on who it is and who's around them, and that's a key thing because we've seen disastrous things happen over here in America with child actors, and there are times I think the parents of the child actors can be just as misguided to downright evil as anybody working in Hollywood. Seeing some of the things that happen there, but I appreciate most the parents who are willing to safeguard their children so that they can have a proper career as opposed to exploit them. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and Lance, I'd love to hear your answer to this when we get to you. Do you think what makes a child actor and their performance good automatically translates over to being a professional adult actor? Do you think that children are able to take that set of skills over, or children oftentimes just playing themselves?
I think it's a case of play, pure mimicry at a child's age, unabandonment. I think there's not an over analyzing aspect in a child performer's mind. I mean, even if we throw back to our child days, if we wanted to play Captain Kirk or whatever, we just did it. It's ingrained in all children to play. And I think the more comfortable you are with it, the easier it is. And then it transitions into the craft, and whatever that might be, you know, the method. It could be reactionary, it could be living in the moment. All those things after a while are programmed, because it's really hard, you know, in a sense, to get a lot of that performance out of a child actor. And to me, it's really a risky investment. You know, I wouldn't at this point risk the investment. I mean, there's a lot involved with it. You know, kids still need to go to school, even though they're working a job as a performer. Child labor laws, all that stuff that are in place that are important. But on the same token, it's like, well, you know, if I'm making a kid's movie, do I necessarily have to have kids in it to sell? No, you don't. And it's hit or miss, you know. Kids could like it, or they can just absolutely hate it. And I think it's 50-50. They may like it and want to keep going on with this performance career. And then there are those that are like, nope, I'm never doing this again. And they just don't, because maybe they're more in tune. Maybe they see this is bad, and maybe there's an element that's not proactive. It's very interesting.
I just read an article about one such child, which is the kid who played Charlie in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Right.
Who had that one role, and then he left. He was like, I just don't like this.
I mean, that happens. Like, you look at a young Anakin Skywalker. That kid only did the one film. He's probably very happy that's all he did. The girl played Newt in Aliens. That's all she did. But then again, you've got other children who really excel at this. And for instance, like Macaulay Culkin, he comes across initially in Home Alone as doing the play, like Lance said.
Doing the play.
But then when I see something like The Good Son, I'm seeing actual craft there. When I look at people like Jamie Bell, who went from being a phenomenal child actor to a really good adult actor as well. Dakota Fanning, however, who started out as a very exceptional child actor, and yet her career seems to have fizzled as an adult. It just kind of depends, because there are those who have the craft who just, for whatever reason, don't seem to succeed. Like the young man from The Sixth Sense, who was just so stellar in that film, and yet he just can't seem to get anything going as an adult.
Yeah, and I think they take paths too. You know, there are the idea of going to college, getting an education, you know, kind of focusing on real world things other than the fantasy world. I mean, even a Jodie Foster did it, you know. I mean, and she was very good as a child. I mean, it was like scary good, and then disappearing for a long time to get educated, and then coming back to the craft. Even
what's her
like
name?
Roddy McDowell, you know, child actor, Elizabeth Taylor, Natalie Wood. I mean, you know, it's a hit or miss. It's really a hit or miss. You got to have a taste for it.
What's her name? Miriam Bilicki, who was a Blossom, and she went off to get a like master's degree, and then she came back into the Big Bang Theory as an adult.
She has a doctorate in neuroscience, actually. So.
That's it. Yeah, that's why she got cast on the show. It's like he was a legitimate like science nerd.
So, at the risk of not wanting to spend too much time on this particular topic, but I have to throw it out there since Showgirls is a favorite of Lance's, a guilty pleasure. What about Elizabeth Berkley?
Well, that was tragic. I mean, I understand the concept of. I mean, that movie's a $60 million stinker, but I'll watch it over and over again just because I marvel at the fact that, wow, this was actually put on film.
Yet she was an American sweetheart in Saved by the Bell, and I would say that Showgirls kind of it definitely put a downturn on her career trajectory.
Absolutely, and that's lessons learned. Do you need to go that extreme to be taken seriously? You know what I mean? It was poised to be big, but just the whole concept of it anyways was ridiculous. I don't know what they were thinking. That's why I'm fascinated by that film. It's just every aspect of it is production wise is 100% the best, but the whole content of it is just pure garbage. And it's sad, you know, but it's to me, it's a case study to be watched and studied to say, don't do this, but see how they did it. It's pretty amazing.
I will say, oh, go ahead, Jeff, and then I'll put my comments
it's,
in.
I understand her motivation because it's such a legitimate concern, especially if you're transitioning from television to film. You know, she's played like this wholesome good girl all this time, and there's a genuine worry about being typecast. Like I think of like Robert Englund, who I enjoyed in the V series about the aliens, the visitors, and he got to be very famous being like the little Willy alien. Everybody loved him, you know, like the meek little lizard guy. And he wanted to step away from that because he probably didn't want to be typecast. So anybody who didn't know him before didn't know about, you know, films like shoot, what was that movie where it's feeding people to gators? I'm Buck and I like to F, you know, that sort of thing.
Oh, I don't know.
And yeah, and so it was a Tobe Hooper film, and he transitioned into Freddy Krueger, which ended up typecasting him as he's trying to get away from being typecast. So like, it's a rough world out there in entertainment.
One of the only movies I remember seeing his face in again was Ford Fairlane. So
Eaten Alive, that was the old movie.
Yes, Eaten Alive. Exactly.
And unless you really want to get drunk, don't anybody listen to what I just said and go out and watch Ford Fairlane. So Ford
Fairlane is amazing. Everybody should watch it.
It is.
Yeah.
But but it was from a time in my life when
go watch Showgirls.
when I would just get, you know, you could get drunk and watch a movie and howl at the most inane things. What I will say about Elizabeth Berkley, the last thing I'll throw in there is that I think that decision shows how important it is, and this is for anybody out there who wants to be an actor or a writer or anything else, where you need good management. She needed an agent who was going to protect her at that point.
Michael Caine had something interesting to say about acting. It wasn't. I don't think it was on Inside the Actors Studio, but one of the showcase interviews he had about the craft of acting and doing all that. And, he said, "I spent many years doing a lot of crap so that I could pick and choose the projects I actually wanted to do."
Yeah.
I think paying your dues.
I think, though, that I understand that she wanted to break out of that role, not be stereotyped, wanted to do something different, wanted to make a splash. But I think this movie, the people who cast her, and this is just me speaking, this is my opinion. I don't know.
Feel like they promised her a bunch of stuff that didn't happen.
Well, I think they promised her a lot of money, and they wanted to use her because she was America's sweetheart and Saved by the Bell. And they marketed it as, guess what? You get to see America's sweetheart nude and doing explicit things.
Right.
She needed an agent to say, you could do this and you're going to get a payday, but, you know, and give her all the stuff and just saying, hey, look, it's a check. They want you.
Well, do you see the parallels then? You know, like when I mentioned a Showgirls versus a Full Monty and how there's a flip on its head and now a double standard. You know what I mean? It's to me that's very relevant because it was just in my mind about wow, you know, how you blow away the tropes, the cliches, and the Full Monty was able to do that. You know, a Showgirls is what it is, and it didn't set any kind of standard or precedence that wasn't already there for stripper movies. It was already there.
Yeah, but you know, once again, you know, we're keeping it honest here and keeping it true. I remember that movie came out, and I remember the marketing, and I was in a very male environment at that time in the Army. Every dude that wanted to see that movie didn't want it because they wanted to see the story of Showgirls. I'll just, you know, they weren't going to see the movie, and that's the truth, you know? So,
you know, like to contrast with the movie that actually shows up within the Full Monty, they're watching Flashdance, and that's essentially the story of a lady who's stripping, but she's looking for something better, and it's a far better film.
Yeah, and it really is.
Yeah, a steel worker.
It really is kind of the American female equivalent of the Full Monty to a certain extent, just without the comedy and everything. But and they added the romance element into it, which is, you know, whatever. You could take it or leave it. I think that's put in there because it was a female lead, but that's me just being old and cantankerous, I think. So, you know.
Ladies love the romance, man.
They do.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a trope too. I think that writers think, oh, well, if it's
a female lead, love it.
when she succeeds at the end, she's not only got to succeed at what her goal was, but she's got to get the band too. It's just okay. I guess. So in the time we have left, and this is not to downplay this aspect, but I think these first two subjects were the most important for this movie because, I don't think I think it's fair to say this movie didn't break any technical ground in filming or special effects and things like that. But I want to start with Lance because you are the filmmaker, and then I'll go to Jeff, and then I'll finish up with me, and then we'll get out of here. From the filmmaking aspect, is there anything that stands out? Anything you would have done better? Anything you love about what they did? Stuff like that.
Oh no, I think it's perfect the way it is. I think they captured the steel mill environment, the class structures. I think they captured the environment perfectly. It was relevant to the story, and it helped propel the story forward. It doesn't matter if it's being in a dingy apartment with no heat versus, like you said, the upper suburban aspect. I think they captured all the elements fantastically, and the grittiness of even the strip club, even in the beginning when the ladies are using the men urinals. You know what I mean? It's I think they captured the grittiness of it that needed to be. And that's when the photography complements the movie. It's not glam, but it looks fantastic. Everything's in focus, everything's composed. Technically, everything is tried and true. And then when that happens, all that is invisible, and you get to take in the story. You're not distracted by any of the ridiculousness of what we have today and the amateurishness of what we have today. This is still, we're going back quite over 2 decades with this film. And this is when it was taken extremely serious. When your performer showed up, you're ready to rock. Technically, everything was spot on, the music, the cinematography, the sound. This is what you want to achieve when you're making a film. This is what you want to achieve. Doesn't matter what the subject matter is this is just top notch. And it's fun to watch. It's visually stimulating. I like it. I think it was great.
I think that's fascinating you say that, and I'll get to Jeff in just a second, because this isn't a movie that relied on any QT camera tricks or special effects or CGI or anything, and yet you made the comments you did. So I think that's kind of a message out there that you don't have to always go for those things either. So
yeah, don't overdo it. If you got the story and the jokes are there and the performers are nailing it, you don't need to put a camera in a glove box or do anything goofy. It's like, okay, that's distracting. That's why you're there. You're there to photograph the performers perform. And that's your job, to make sure that plays out. Anything beyond that, if it's noticeable, you're sucking the audience out. They're like, if they're starting to notice the technical aspect, then you've dropped the ball. And movies like this, when you're just sold on the story and the performances, the environment, it's a win. This is what you want to achieve.
I don't know why, but it reminds me of that saying always when you watch a sports game. It's like, if you never notice the ref, he's done a good job.
Exactly. Yep.
Jeff, what about you? What are your thoughts on this whole topic?
I've got to echo Lance on a lot of this. I've also, I won't call myself a filmmaker because I don't want to ruffle Lance's feathers, but I was a video maker. And one of the things I enjoyed was having camera movement in my shots, using cranes and jibs and sliders and all sorts of things. I like the kinesthesiology of that sort of thing. But this is not the sort of thing you need that for. You don't need Dutch angles here. And like Lance said, you don't need to stick a camera in a glove box or do crazy overhead shots. I thought all of this was appropriately restrained and framed very well. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite sequences in the film is where they start dancing in the workers line, the unemployment line, and it's just a wonderful wide shot, and the guys just start kind of getting to the beat, and you cut back to see Robert Carlyle's expression into it, and it's just wonderful, this whole thing. And if this film would be done today, it would be so Magic Mike. There'd be all this shifting camera, all these cuts. They would have top-notch choreography. I love the fact that these guys had, very basic choreography. and there'd be glitz and glam, and there'd be lens flares and all this unnecessary crap, all these transitions that we don't need. I'm 100% on board with Lance. This film was perfectly shot the way it was. It focused on the story and cut away all the fat, nothing extraneous.
I'm afraid that they also would have cast beautiful people who would have gotten in incredible shape for the movie.
It's like, yes, I'm just a blue collar guy. I'll rip off my shirt and my
Right.
8-pack.
Yeah, Chris Hemsworth, as Gaz, it'd be like it just wouldn't be the same because
It wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, these are normal dudes. Not to take
Mhm.
anything away from Chris Hemsworth. The thing I will say, and I'm curious if you guys have any comment on this, is the thing that always gets me about the look of this movie is the lighting. It to me, it gives a definite mood. I don't know if that's what I've never been to England. I've never been to Sheffield, but there just seems to be a general pall, especially at the beginning movie, a general pall and gloominess over everything that's going on, which really lets you know what the situation is for our characters and for this town.
I don't know anything about the production, but it felt like they used all natural lighting throughout the film.
That's movie magic. I mean, with the film stocks, the lenses and stuff. I mean, Britain's a flat lit place. It's overcast, so your light's going to always be even, and that's the beauty of it. So with flat light, you don't have to worry about hard shadows. You don't have to worry about hot spots, and that's why, in a sense, some things work better under flat light. And then when you add a little bit of light for contrast, it just helps you, even if it's reflected light. But that's what I think helps the environment, the grittiness of it. I mean, you can't overlight Britain. Anybody would know, no, it's not sunshine. Even, most of the time it's overcast, and that's okay. You can look at the most high dollar James Bond movie, it's overcast. It's not lit to be glamorized, but it's lit to get your resolution and your contrast. And I think that lends to the rawness of the film.
I mean, because I was going to say they carried that lighting concept over even into the interior shots.
Yep.
Exactly.
Everywhere.
And I think that's and you see those greens pop, in the warehouse. You see those colors that nowadays nobody wants to touch because maybe the backgrounds are CGI'd, but paint that wall green. Give me some contrast, and when you're photographing something. Don't just let it go into muddiness or blackness. Don't make it gray, or you know what I mean? You need to do something with it. And that's what helps the environment of the film. It brings out the contrast and the colors. And it's kind of, in a sense, to me, stock lit. And maybe in a sense, because a lot of the shots are very panoramic, that's why the transition to the stage play, I believe, the musical might have been so successful because they had already a written storyboard. Just look at the movie.
I think this is what's so fascinating, though, because, just as your average moviegoer, you never notice this stuff. As I've gotten more into Cinema Crusaders, but as a critic and everything, I've noticed these things. And it's like, it's a little thing, but right from the very beginning, emotionally, it puts you as the viewer in a mood.
Exactly.
In a mental place.
Look at what
that is the craft,
look at what they do with a lot of modern films these days. They've got this lighting structure where they overprocess everything. And if you look at older films when the saturation of the color was just coming from them using a particular style of light as opposed to color correcting things, or if you use a lot of gels and things, that was for a different sort of movie, like maybe a horror movie or a mystery movie. But if you look at something like The Sound of Music, all those bright, vibrant colors that are there, and what do we see today so often in films? Like everything's got to be lit or color coded with a turquoise and orange, and it all just gets samey. It all just gets boring, and it has a lot less impact, if you ask me.
I think
the technicalities of the digital, though, you don't have the color saturation as you do with film. It's just not there. Even at its highest resolutions, if you shoot a blue sky, there's gradients of color in the sky that you catch on film that you won't catch on digital. So that's why they go into color correction, and it muddies the image.
I think you also have to ask yourself, though, what you're just saying about the colors in modern films. And I said that this the lighting and the colors here put me in a certain mood to be able to accept the story. Well, what is it doing to your enjoyment of the film and to the story in modern movies if every movie is lit the same and it's lit in a certain way? Because it's a fact that certain colors play on our psychological, our psychology, our mental state in certain ways. It's why mental institutions are colored.
That's why the color shift of the turquoise and the orange has become so popular. They realize they're getting a certain thing out of the audience by having these colors. But it's just like the thing in comics. I don't know if you've heard the phrase like bisexual lighting has become a palette in mainstream comics to engender a specific response in the readers.
It's really interesting.
Well, that's also the point of, like, even when they make a full Monty, they know what cameras they're getting, they know what lenses, they know what film stock is going to fit best, be it a tungsten or a daylight, and the variances of shooting each and the locations. And lighting it. I mean, these are very highly skilled professions and jobs. I mean, this is a lost craft. I mean, it's difficult to do, but it's so much more rewarding. Trust me, it's so much more rewarding when you nail it. It's like, wow, people aren't paying attention to the technical aspect. They're just looking at, wow, look at the colors. Look at how I like this. And that's the psychology you want to grab.
And I think this really speaks to something that is easy to do across numerous professions, where people look at something and they're like, oh, it's easy to do. Any Tom, Dick, and Harry can pick up a camera and do something. Anybody can pick up a keyboard and write a novel. Anybody could sit down and write a comic book script. It's like, you could, but it's not easy. It's something you got to work at. And if you want to be good at it, you really got to work at it. There's more to it than what you think.
Absolutely. And don't fake it till you make it. Just make it.
Exactly. Well, I think this has been a great episode, guys. I think I really enjoyed talking about this show. I got some ideas for our next shows, but all of you out there will have to wait till next week, same time, Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, to find out what we're going to talk about. Till then, I want to thank my co-host, my fellow Cinema Crusaders. Thank you, Jeff.
It was my pleasure, and you can take everything else off, folks, but you can leave your hat on. Watch the movie. Watch the movie. You'll understand.
Nice 9.5 weeks.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lance.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was fun being here.
Absolutely. And thank you all out there for watching. As always, if you have any suggestions on stuff you'd like us to cover, let us know in DMs. Any of the hosts here, especially myself or the Cinema Crusaders. And we will, definitely cover those. And please check out all the other podcasts on the UCPN, and check out our written reviews on Comic Crusaders, as well as for all your pop culture news and comic reviews as well. So
awesome.
I got all of that out of my brain. So with only stumbling a couple times. On behalf of Jeff and Lance and myself, thank you all for watching, and we will see you all next week on Cinema Crusaders.
See ya.